Benedict, I suppose the first thing to say is thank goodness it's only a week left in this Tory leadership contest.
Oh, yes.
Almost this time next week, we'll know who's won.
It's a good thing we don't have a month left, say, to try to find out who we already know is going to be Prime Minister. I mean, that would have been a real disaster, a real poor set of planning. No, we're only a few days left, relatively, but I think still some concern around the fact that actually we've not got much of a clear plan, I don't think, from either candidate, but especially actually from Liz Truss, because she is going to be the Prime Minister unless something unforeseen happens. And that's the situation that we find ourselves in, and it does seem to still be Liz Truss offering tax cuts, which are obviously very popular with her voters in the Conservative Party, but not actually necessarily popular amongst all Tory voters at large, not necessarily that popular amongst MPs, not necessarily that popular amongst the rest of the country. And it does then boil down to that old adage, which is that, you know, it's all very well being ideologically very pure, as Jeremy Corbyn was for the Labour Party, one wing of the Labour Party. If you're not actually going to be in government to sort of force those issues through, to be ideologically pure, that's not very helpful. Now, Liz Truss is not going to have a lot of wiggle room. She doesn't have that much time after she becomes Prime Minister until we get into the next general election cycle. And as I've just pointed out, she doesn't actually have relatively that much support from within the party in the House of Commons, and she's dealing with something pretty catastrophic, actually, in scale. So even if she does bring in a raft of tax cuts, we probably aren't actually going to see the net benefits of those, if there are any, for some time down the line, possibly not in time, in fact, terms of to save her.
Stimulating the economy and the wider effect of that, I suppose people will see it in their pay packets. But
they will.
But I wonder, though, the constructive ambiguity of Liz Truss's policy position right now, in your view, Benedict Spence, does she actually have a plan? And she just doesn't want to say it before this vote until after she's in, and then she can reveal something that maybe the Tory members might not like so much, maybe a lot of spending, or does she not have a plan at all and she's trying to wing it, floating ideas, seeing what lands and what doesn't? Where are we in
I think it's the former. I would be horrified if it were the latter, actually, and I would be saying that that's a dereliction of duty and she shouldn't be standing to be leader of the Conservative Party or Prime Minister, if that were the case. So I have to actually hope that it is the former, because I don't really see that there are any alternatives. Matthew Parris is not a columnist I tend to agree with, but he did make a very good point in his Sunday Times column last week, which is that, by and large, although many sort of small state Conservatives would acknowledge that they want states to be smaller, right now the state is not the thing that's holding back places in the Red Wall. He used Mansfield as the example. It's the only thing that's propping these places up. And actually, it'll take time to get the investment, to get rid of the regulation, to get the circumstances, the environment, to actually turbocharge these parts of the country. Because honestly, this is the result of... This is not, I'm afraid, just the result of Russia invading Ukraine or even just the pandemic. This is institutional decay, and it's private and public sector. You know, both sides have been asleep at the wheel, and it does go back over decades. That is not something that can be undone overnight with a series of, even if they are quite aggressive tax cuts, it can't be undone in a small space of time. This is something that will require, on the one hand, short-term alleviation of pressure, but it will also require Liz Truss, I'm afraid, to come out with a plan and say, this is how we are going to solve energy issues long-term. This is how we're going to solve water shortage issues long-term. And that might involve a lot more spending. That might involve not being able to make the kind of tax cuts that she's initially pledging to her supporters. As you say, that might not go down very well with them. They might sit there and go, well, if we're getting this sort of big state, we might as well go for Rishi Sunak, who does have experience of this. So you can understand, I think, why she is being a little stum at this stage. But she's not going to be able to keep that way for very long, actually. It's going to have to be right out of the traps the second she's in number 10. The country needs this. The markets need this. There needs to be support for ordinary people. And, you know, that old cliche, winter is coming, haha. It is actually going to hit people very hard. People are already feeling it now when the weather is, in the mid-20s, early 30s. So, you know, not a lot of wiggle room, I'm afraid.
It's going to be really, really fascinating. Potentially next week, some big, big announcements at the start of a Liz Truss premiership. If, of course, those polls are right and Liz Truss actually will become Prime Minister.